All rise.
Please be seated. This court is called to order. Defense counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, ma'am. So during the break, Sgt Crispin, you had the opportunity to review these 3 files.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so I'm bringing up again and displaying on the VTC what has been previously identified as Defense Exhibit Delta. And so this is the first file on a Defense Exhibit Delta. And you recall these messages between you and Senior McCassell.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so the beginning of file 1 starts off around 29 March because you see the bubble above. Is that correct?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, step to the law, sir.
Which file is this again? I'm sorry.
This is file 1.
Okay. March 30th, yes.
Yes, so this is the bubble. There are 2 bubbles, right, that we see in this first video. And the top bubble looks like it comes in March 29th, the day before.
Can we see that one?
Yeah. Go ahead, go back. Pause. Okay. So actually, we don't have a date here, but go ahead and press play. Let's see if it'll snap out. We don't have a date, but we have a date here of March 30th. Okay? Would you agree with me?
March 30th, yes.
Okay. In March 30th, go ahead, press play. These are your messages. You are in blue. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Do you want me to sit back down?
Sure, if you don't mind. Okay. Your messages are in blue, and then Senior McCassell messages are in the gray text on the left
Yes,
side of
ma'am.
the screen.
Yes.
Okay. How do you know that those are your messages and you're the one who's talking to him?
I just had an opportunity to review all of the text messages back and forth. I do recall those situations, and they appear to be my way of typing.
Okay. I'm now going to go to a minute and 28 seconds on the first file on Defense Exhibit Delta. That's been identified as Defense Exhibit Delta.
It won't update the screen until you press play.
Yeah, go ahead, press play. Okay, and yeah, 128. Can I drive through the airports? Okay. This is your interactions with him also on Monday, April 3rd, 2023. Is that correct?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, sit down.
I just don't want to verify if I can't see it.
Sure, of course, sir.
So, April 3rd, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Defense counsel, if you're going to ask a lot of questions about texts here, it would be better to have the witness stay there so he's
Yeah.
not going back and forth.
Yes, Your Honor.
And so these are your messages Monday, April 3rd. And go ahead and press play. And they go through all of April 3rd. And then they go through April 4th. Is that correct, sir?
Just, Your Honor, permission to be able to.
Yes.
Yes, you. For the record, trial counsel was simply asking for permission to approach so that he can view the screen, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you may.
April 4th,
Yes,
sir?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, play. Keep playing, please. Pause. April 5th.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, play. Pause. April 6th.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, play. All right, and you go to the next file, please. And the bailiff is now pulling up and projecting file 2 on what has been previously identified as Defense Exhibit Delta. Okay. So we're still now at April 6th.
Yes, ma'am.
Confirming? Okay, go ahead, play. Pause. Still April 6th, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, play.
Defense counsel, when you're pausing to point those out, if you can start doing your time hats on there so that the record's clear where you're
Yes,
pausing.
ma'am. Pause. And April 7th is paused at, I can't see the number, so give me 1 second. It's at 27 seconds on the second file of what's been previously identified as this Defense Exhibit Delta.
Thank you.
And then, do you want me to read you it now, or do you want me to just read it into the record later?
And you can do that later.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, and then go ahead and play.
Trial counsel, are you able to see it from there?
Yes, sir.
Stop. Okay, and so now at minute 1 and 55 seconds, it starts April 8th messages that you have with Senior Castle, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, play. Stop. Okay, and so now at 2 minutes and 17 seconds now starts Sunday, April 9th, the text messages you exchange with Senior and Castle.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, play. let's go to the third file on this exhibit. And the third file picks up on still April 9th of 2023 from the previous recording, right?
So is it overlapping a little bit?
I mean,
Like, is that from the end of the last
Yes,
recording?
yeah.
Okay, gotcha, understood.
okay. Right. Right top. Oh, you know what?
This is Saturday.
Yeah, this looks like the same overlap. Okay. Keep going, let's see. Okay, that's fine. It appears to be an overlap of the same file that was above. But I'm done. I'm moving to admit files 1 and 2 on what has been previously identified as Defense Exhibit Bravo. Go ahead, Casey. And I will delete file 3. Delta. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Trial counsel, as to files 1 and 2 of defense?
You know what that is, Your Honor.
Okay. So files 1 and 2 of Defense Exhibit Delta are admitted, or for identification, are admitted as Defense Exhibit Delta. Do not, I mean, you certainly delete it from Defense Exhibit Delta, but make sure that file 3 goes onto a separate and
For an appellate exhibit.
And we'll make that an appellate exhibit. I'm assuming that 17 that you have is next to mine. That will be appellate exhibit 17. We will reserve that.
Yes, ma'am.
So make sure you have that.
Permission to provide at the next recess.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
File 3, yes ma'am. And that'll be appellate exhibit 17 is what I have.
You want me to
Continue.
proceed? Thank you,
You may.
So I know that we left on the text messages of April 9th, but you continued to converse via text message with Senior Castle after April 9th.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you continued until when?
I think the last text message that I just reviewed was he showed me a picture of his baby, and we were, I think it was probably like that 1 or 2 days he was back between being released from confinement and going on his parental leave. Okay. And I helped him update his BAH. We made sure his leave got submitted correctly. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so you were also in contact with him April 10th, is that correct, sir?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
And April 10th is what significant date?
From the timelines and from what I understand, that the 10th was the day that he was put into confinement initially.
Okay. Yes, sir. And so you conversed with him via text message that day as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. During the April 3rd through April 7th, this is the week prior to when he was placed in pretrial confinement, you were in constant communication with Senior Castle.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And he had, a different duty location.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And with that, he was told to report to you.
Yes, ma'am. As best as I remember, I believe one of the orders he was issued was that he would not be communicating with me for his accountability, and I think it was either in the order or I sent an email to his flight separately where I specifically told them not to communicate with him that week, and then I asked him to just let me know if someone broke that.
Okay. And he was communicating with you during that week?
Yes, ma'am.
You knew where he was?
For the most part.
No further questions.
One moment, General Counsel. Okay, trial counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. And so you were communicating with Airman Castle throughout that time, that last week that led up to pretrial confinement?
Yes, sir.
And during that time, he was in TAPS, or TAP?
He was supposed to be, yes.
Was he in TAP?
He wasn't there the entire time.
So he was absent for some of those times?
He was.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Defense counsel?
Yeah. To Sgt Crispin, he was only ordered into TAPS, or to do TAPS, the 6th and the 7th of that week, right?
That's not correct, ma'am. He was ordered to do TAP previously. He was offered he was offered more than one date to schedule, and then when he did not commit to one, we had to assign him a date. So this was probably the second time he was being required to go to TAP after he failed to do it the first time.
Okay,
But
and you'd agree with me that he didn't have a pending discharge?
At that time, no, ma'am.
And so he was ordered to do TAPS, but he didn't have a pending discharge.
At that time, no, ma'am.
Okay, so he was just ordered to do TAPS, not for a specific military purpose or military disciplinary action.
Actually, so whenever you're within, I believe it's a year of separation, you're required to do TAP, but it is a congressionally mandated program, and whenever you do it, I think it's good for up to 4 years. And he would be within that timeline if he was to retire at 20, and he was not going to work, and we were trying to make him, or insist that, I should say, that we were trying to give him opportunities to report to duty. There was one opportunity that he did not follow up on, I think as another chief's, that Chief Benavidez knew, where he could have been reporting somewhere else besides his work center to make furniture or work on wood or something, and then he didn't follow up on it. He had a problem with Sergeant Carey, and said that was the reason he wasn't reporting to work the first 3 months of the year. However, Sergeant Carey wasn't reporting to that building at all after February, and then once he did find that out, then he had a problem with Sergeant Cleveland and Garcia. He always had a reason to not report to duty. So TAP was maybe a Band-Aid to sorts, but the commanders directed a lot of people to go to TAP, or asked them to at different times, or maybe it'd be a good idea for transition.
Okay, but you'd agree with me that you just said that it's mandated for people who are within a year of separation. He's not within a year of separation.
Yes, but it's also good for 4 years, which he would have been.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Nothing further.
Trial counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. And so TAP is educational and not just necessary when you have to leave out of the military.
Yes, sir, absolutely. People do that at different times throughout their career.
And you can do it multiple times.
You can do it multiple times. But it is required before separation to have done it within a year, I think, or if you haven't done it yet.
And to your
Or your
knowledge,
separation date.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, go ahead.
And to your knowledge, Airman Castle was told that Master Sergeant Carey was no longer supervisor.
That he was no longer reporting to that duty location.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Sgt Crispin, I have some questions for you. It's a little bit awkward,
Yes, ma'am.
so don't try
Should I
to...
stand or?
No.
Okay.
Keep sitting.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm telling you that it's going to be hard to keep that line of sight.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm going to ask you a question about your last comment first. You said that Airman Castle was told that Sergeant Carey was no longer reporting to the duty location.
Right.
Do you know if he was ever notified that Sergeant Carey was no longer his supervisor? Did you notify him that Sergeant Carey was no longer his supervisor?
No, ma'am, I did not.
Okay.
May I add? There's been many times where he would send his location to me,
Okay.
and whenever I was holding the phone, I would correct most times to say, okay, I'm not in your chain of command. You've got to report that to in-flight in your chain of command. I was aware one time that he reported that to Sergeant Carey by just sending him a screenshot of telling me. So I understand that he had some animosity or some kind of separation there, and we tried to mediate that in different ways at different times. And I believe Captain Lawrence took a more active role later on to kind of supplant that, relationship that wasn't working.
Okay. Now, understanding that I have not seen Defense Exhibit Delta, the text messages, and I will at some point, who ordered Airman Castle to attend TAP?
The commander.
And the dates that he was supposed to attend TAP, to your knowledge?
For that order, ma'am, I believe that was for the week of the 3rd to the 7th.
And to your knowledge, did he attend TAP at any point?
He did, but he didn't complete it. And we got notification from, I believe it was Major Negray, when he did not return after lunch. And then we got an email, or we got a letter written by Miss Hartman, who's in charge of TAP, basically telling us he was not going to be receiving credit because he was not where he was supposed to be when he was supposed to do it, and he did not get permission or coordinate as he was supposed to coordinate with Mrs. Hartman as well while he was reporting to TAP for any appointments or anything that would pull him out that would threaten him from not receiving credit for those days. And we got a letter from Ms. Hartman stating that he was not fulfilling that obligation.
How many days of the 5 did he attend TAPs, to your knowledge?
I can't tell you with certainty here right now, ma'am.
Okay.
But it requires, to complete it, you have to do at least the 3 days, sometimes the additional 2, and then you have to do a capstone either way, which normally doesn't happen in that same week. But you won't be scheduled for the capstone until you've completed everything else.
Okay. During the week of the 3 to 7, understanding that he was not telling Ms. Hartman about his appointments, was he notifying you of appointments?
I think there was one instance in particular where he said he was going to go do something, or I think maybe go to a clinic or pick something up, and I specifically replied, make sure you coordinate that with Mrs. Hartman.
Okay.
that's to make sure that they give him credit, which they didn't.
Okay. Did they provide you, when they provided you something in writing, did they tell you when he was present? Or specifically when he was not present?
When Ms. Hartman first notified me that Castle was not where he was supposed to be, it was over the phone. And then I asked her if she could put what she was telling me over the phone in writing.
Okay.
And she was not used to writing memorandums, so I gave her a template. And she wrote a memorandum with whatever the details were, with an attachment of an email from Major Negre that was sent to Ms. Hartman. I don't recall the contents of the letter now at this point while I'm sitting here, Your Honor. And I also don't remember if that letter was the first time or the second time he didn't complete TAPS. I can't recall offhand.
Okay. Defense counsel, do you have any follow-up questions based on my questions?
May I have a minute, Your Honor?
You may.
Okay, come down. All right, Capt Crispin. Isn't it true that on 31 March 2023, Senior Airman Castle was ordered to do the last 2 days of TAPS according to the order that Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez gave?
For 31 March?
On 31 March.
Oh, that was the date of the order. Is that
That
what
was
you're
the
saying?
date of the order. That's what I'm saying, sir.
That sounds accurate because that would be the week prior to that week.
Okay, so
Yes.
he gave that order Yes?
Sounds accurate. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
and in that order, he says you are hereby ordered to report in person to the last 2 days of TAP and complete the capstone.
Okay, that tracks. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yes or no?
Well, I'm not looking at it. I'd have to read it.
Okay, would reading a copy of this refresh your recollection?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Okay, handing, this is going to be messy, handing a copy via defense computer of what is now marked as Appellate Exhibit 18 for the record, and this is the order from Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, permission to approach the witness, Your Honor.
And you don't have a...
I don't have a hard copy and no ability to print, and my laptop is about to die.
Okay, you may.
And read it silently, and then
yes, ma'am.
when you're done, sir, just go ahead and look up and let me know.
During the recess, defense counsel make sure that a hard copy is provided to the court reporter.
Yes, Your Honor.
You said 31 March?
31 March. It is a one-page document.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. The member refused to sign, but he did acknowledge it to me.
Okay, and you know that because it's your signature on that document.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so when you testified earlier that he was ordered into TAPS 3 through 7 March, that wasn't correct.
For the week of 3 through 7 March, that's what we said.
No, your testimony was that he was ordered into TAPS for the entire 5-day period from 3 through 7 March.
If you'd like to review, that's fine, but my understanding when you were interviewing me was we were talking about the week of.
No, right now.
Yes, ma'am, I understand. If you'd like to review, that's fine.
Okay.
Because this was, like I said too, I can't remember if it was the first or second time.
Okay. And so you'd agree with me now that on that week he was only ordered 6 and 7 March?
The last 2 days of TAP?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. April. Right?
Of April?
Of
Yes,
April.
ma'am. Yeah.
Okay. Now, he was ordered to report to you April 3rd through the 5th.
Is that in the other order? The other order was, I believe, about going to his duty location and who to report to.
Okay. And you stated earlier that he was supposed to be only in communication to tell you about his whereabouts between 3 and 5 April.
The week of 3 to 7 April for TAP, as in the interview when we were speaking in the office, for the week of 3 to 7 for TAP, I do recall that I was responsible for him to report to me for that alternate duty location
Okay.
of TAP, which, as you are pointing out, was only the last 2 days of that week.
Okay.
Now,
I'm all just asking.
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I'm just trying to make, but there's 2 separate orders. One of them was for TAP, and if I recall, the other order, which would specify, possibly, I'm not sure, was for him not reporting to his duty locations, correct? Was that what the other order was?
Are you asking me, sir? I
I'm
can't
asking
testify.
you. Yeah, okay, yes, ma'am. Understood.
Well, I apologize, but I can't answer that question for you.
But he was supposed to report to me while he was at the alternate duty location for TAP, which, as you were pointing out, was Thursday and Friday of that week.
Okay.
The week of 3 to 7.
Okay, so he was supposed to at least be in communication with you from based on your understanding of the order from that Monday to Wednesday, which was 3 to 5.
Again, based on what you just pointed out and allowed me to corroborate, that one order of the 2 that he was issued at the same time only covers the last 2 days of TAP. So that order only covers Thursday and Friday.
Okay, I'm asking your knowledge about the other order. I'm not asking you any more questions about this order.
Oh,
so
okay.
maybe it's my questions that are poor, so I apologize. I'm
sorry.
asking you your knowledge of where his whereabouts are supposed to be from April 3rd to April 5th. That's my question. Do you understand my question, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I understand that. I cannot answer that without reviewing the texts again or seeing the other order.
Okay. You'd agree with me that these text messages show that he was checking in with you from 3 to 5 April?
Again, I'd have to check the text messages again.
Okay. All right. No further questions.
Trial counsel, do you have any reprise based on my questions or defense counsel's questions?
No, Your Honor.
Defense counsel, is this witness subject to recall?
No, Your Honor.
Tech Sergeant Crispin, you are permanently excused from this court-martial. As long as the court-martial continues to go on, do not discuss your testimony or your knowledge of this case with anyone outside of counsel for both sides or Senior Airman Castle. You can go back to your duty section now, and you are released. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Defense rested.
Thank you, defense counsel. Trial counsel, do you have any rebuttal?
No, Your Honor.
Senior Airman Castle, you did not don't stand up. You did not testify. Was that your personal decision not to testify?
Yes, ma'am.
Are both parties prepared to argue, or do you need a recess?
Yes, ma'am.
There were two questions.
Your Honor, I'm prepared.
Trial counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Oh, sorry. Prepared to argue.
Thank you. Trial counsel, you may present argument.
Yes, Your Honor. You proceed. Ask, tell, make. You learned about this confinement tactic from Mr. Kelly, a former confinement airman here at Cannon Air Force Base. It's a concept used with members who aren't complying and who aren't following standards and instructions. You start out by asking them to do something. And when they don't do that, you tell them to do something. And when they don't comply with that, you make them do something. And throughout this trial, it's the same concept that LRS used when they were interacting with Senior Airman Castle. You learned throughout the trial that they asked him to check in with his supervisors. And when he didn't comply with that, they told him and gave him an order saying, you will check in with your supervisors, you will come to work, and you will go to the appointments that you have. And when he didn't comply with that, they made him comply. They gave him an order and told him, you must report at a certain time, at a certain location, and do your job. It's the same concept that confinement used when Airman Castle was brought to confinement and began in processing. He was asked to stand against the wall, and when he didn't comply with that, he was told by staff, you will comply with our instructions, you will stand against this wall. And when he didn't comply with confinement staff, they made him comply by using a restraint chair and completing a cell abstraction the next day. It's the same concept that the Air Force uses, but we call it progressive discipline. Your Honor, we're here today because Senior Airman Castle's inability to comply with military standards that boil down to duty and respect. Airman Castle is an 18-year career airman who knows all too well what duty means and what's required of him. His entire career in the Air Force, he's been asked to do things, he's been told to do things, maybe at some point he's been made to do things. And each time he has complied. But Airman Castle decided between late December and early 2023 that the rules didn't apply to him anymore. That he didn't have to follow the rules. That he can pick and choose when he came to work. As Captain Lamb stated at the beginning of this court, and as Your Honor knows, the government has the burden in this case to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And the government has met their burden and provided the court with testimony and evidence to explain the timeline of Airman Castle's actions, his failure to show to work, his inability to follow order, and when put in confinement, how he assaulted a security forces member. All Airman Castle was asked to do was his very basic duty: show up to work, but he refused to do that. The evidence we provided clearly showed that LRS set expectations for Senior Airman Castle. As you heard from Sgt Carey, Captain Lawrence, Colonel Vasquez, and Sgt Crispin, the entire command team was more than understanding and accommodating to Senior Airman Castle. Senior Airman Castle never provided any written documentation of his conditions, but the team still heard him out. So when Senior Airman Castle explains he has anxiety and he's struggling with mental health issues, the unit moved him from his duty station and moved him to equipment, so all he had to do was answer emails to limit his interaction with people, as he had anxiety with crowds. All they asked of Senior Airman Castle was that he report to his new duty station, but he didn't do that. All the unit asked of him was that he put his appointments on the calendar so that the team had accountability of where he was, but he didn't do that. So from December of 2022 to February of 2023, Senior Airman Castle was in and out of work. He wasn't complying with what the expectations were set for him from his unit. He didn't want to do that. So they told him, this is what's required of you. They counseled him as you'd expect a unit to do, using progressive discipline. They had MFRs of when he failed to show. They gave him LOCs and LORs and had conversations in his supervisor's office with him to get him back on track and complying with standards. You heard from Sgt Carey about how Castle wanted to handle things man-to-man when Sgt Carey found out he wasn't finishing his tasks. And he asked him, hey, you're coming in on Monday. And Castle responded that they could handle this man-to-man. Sgt Carey also talks about an incident where he was giving him paperwork, he was giving Airman Castle paperwork, and Airman Castle began to yell over him, and he put him at parade rest, but Airman Castle responded, I'm good. You also heard from Sgt Carey, who stated he felt disrespected when he read Airman Castle's LOR response. And while, yes, he explained that the LOR response wasn't directed at him, he was mentioned in the response. And because of those mentions of him and his supervisor role in Airman Castle's life, he himself felt disrespected. The testimony you heard and the text messages provided are all evidence that point directly to why Airman Castle's language towards Master Sergeant Carey and NCO is a violation of Article 91. Airman Castle knew who he was talking to. He made those remarks via text message and in person, and he was talking directly to his NCO. All this evidence points to why Airman Castle disrespected his NCO. Each piece of paperwork was a rehabilitative opportunity to course correct and get Airman Castle back on track complying with military standards. And each time the unit told Senior Airman Castle his behavior wasn't meeting the mark, that it wasn't up to standard, he stopped showing up. And again, there was no change in his behavior. So at the end of February, his unit issued him an NJP, and a strike was taken. And as Colonel Vasquez testified, there was no change in his behavior after that. So they make him show up to work. And we provided the court with a copy of Colonel Vasquez's order to Airman Castle. He walked us through why he didn't, thinking that, hey, if the paperwork from his supervisors didn't work and the NJP strike didn't work, then maybe an order from his commander will get him to show up to work. But Airman Castle had issues with his leadership. He believes that this order was an unlawful order, that he didn't have to comply with this order. Airman Castle received verbal notice of this order as well as a written order from his commander that he refused to sign. This was a direct order from his unit letting him know, you must comply. You must come to work. But he didn't do that. He failed to show up to work. And this evidence points to why Airman Castle failed to obey a lawful command, or a lawful order, excuse me. From March until April, no one could really account for where Airman Castle was. The unit would reach out and ask, what's going on, or where are you? And Airman Castle would reply sometimes that he was either at the chaplain's or at mental health, or he had an appointment, something was going on. But eventually, Airman Castle stopped responding to those text messages and calls. He even told his unit he would stop responding to their messages. And while he did come back onto base here and there, he never was reporting to duty as what was asked of him. He was only reporting in for personal appointments. He was already not showing up to work since December on and off. And he was not on approved leaves except for a few days in March. But again, this on and off, not returning to work, not complying with order, are all pieces of evidence in combination that show his refusal to meet the order and go to the elements of Article 86 and point to why Airman Castle was guilty, points to evidence of why he meets the standards of AWOL. The court also heard from Sgt Crispin, who said that between April 6th and April 7th, Airman Castle had an alternate duty location of TAPS. And he was required to go to TAPS and complete TAPS. And we saw that order. He refreshed his memory on that order. But that too was not completed. Sgt Crispin also testified that he stopped showing to TAPS. And that was the TAPS coordinator and the people who were running TAPS who reached out to Sgt Crispin in the unit letting him know, hey, he's not getting credit because he stopped showing up. So it's not that Airman Castle had an issue with Sgt Carey or that he had an issue with his leadership or LRS in total. It was that Airman Castle just didn't like showing up to work. His duty location was moved from LRS to TAPS and he didn't go there. He was told, notify us ahead of time if you're not going to be here, if you have appointments or things that will keep you from returning back to the class. And he didn't do that either. But as Your Honor heard, the order didn't change his behavior either. So Colonel Vasquez reached up to his group commander and out to other squadron commanders within the group to get guidance. And on the morning of 10 April 2023, Colonel Vasquez met with those people because ultimately he felt like he was out of options. He had counseled this member, he had taken a strike from this member, he had given an order to this member, and nothing was getting through to him. Colonel Vasquez even testified that he met with Airman Castle personally. In a squadron of 300 plus people, Colonel Vasquez sat down with Airman Castle and worked out a plan on how to meet the mark, how to get to 20 years. Calculated what your benefits will look like when you reach retirement, what you can do with that money. Essentially, his squadron commander wanted him to succeed. The unit put him in TAPS so that when he reaches that 20-year mark, he's good to go. Everyone wanted to see him meet the 20. But Colonel Vasquez felt like he was out of options. So he goes to that meeting, but as he testified, he walked away feeling there wasn't really a clear plan. And so on that same day when Airman Castle didn't show up to work, a BOLO was issued for him. And on that same day, Airman Castle was arrested and brought to confinement on base to be held. And while defense wanted to characterize it as a sting operation by OSI who was not involved in any way, or that he was jumped by security forces as if they're some goon squad, Airman Castle was just arrested and brought into confinement. And as Your Honor heard, he still was not compliant. And that's when ask, tell, make took on a different meaning. And Your Honor heard from Mr. Kelly and Sergeant Poteet, both security forces members at the time. And Mr. Kelly walked us through the full day of getting...
Objection made. Facts not in evidence. As it pertains to Kelly.
Trial counsel?
Your Honor, I don't believe I said anything that was not in the record. All I stated was that Mr. Kelly and Sergeant Poteet were both...
Improper argument as to the assault on Kelly.
So the first objection is overruled. Improper argument.
As to their suggestion that there was an assault on Kelly.
Your Honor, I haven't stated anything about assault yet. I simply stated that you heard from Mr. Kelly and Sergeant Poteet, both security forces members, and then the objection came.
Okay. Objection overruled at this time.
Yes, ma'am.
You may bring it up again if you believe that it's warranted. Trial counsel, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. So as Your Honor heard testimony from Mr. Kelly and Sergeant Poteet, both security forces members at the time, about the in-processing process of Airman Kelly. Mr. Kelly walked us through the full day of in-processing and getting Senior Airman Castle in process to confinement. He stated that on the first day, Senior Airman Castle was combative, but he understood why it may be so. He might have been disoriented and unclear as to why he was even there. And Mr. Kelly even stated that was understandable. But Mr. Kelly also testified that Airman Castle was not complying with instructions, that he was told to do certain things, but he didn't comply, and then he was made to do things, that they had to bring out the restraint chair. And Mr. Kelly testified that the restraint chair was used twice. He walked us through the confinement training of Ask, Tell, Make, and he testified that upon entering confinement, Senior Airman Castle was asked to follow their instructions. He had to watch a briefing and then proceed with in-processing. Mr. Kelly explained that most of this in-processing occurred in the hallway of security forces, and as Sergeant Poteet stated, he could hear the commotion going on that day. He was instructed to stand against the wall, and when he didn't comply, he was told again to stand up against the wall. And when he didn't comply with those instructions, they had to bring out the restraint chair. And Mr. Kelly explained that he had to raise his voice, and that as protocol allowed, they were then authorized to use that restraint chair. He further explained that it was used twice during in-processing, but ultimately in-processing was completed that night. The next day in confinement, Senior Airman Castle still was not complying. Tech Sergeant Poteet took the stand. He explained that he came in that morning and was told he might have to participate in a cell extraction because Senior Airman Castle was irate and not following instructions. He explained that he had a blanket over his head and was informed, told instructions, and he didn't, or asked it to do instructions, then told to do instructions, and now the cell extraction would be occurring as that was the next step in making him comply with those instructions. And as Tech Sergeant Poteet testified, he was participating in that cell extraction because the confinement reg requires that at least 5 people participate, and that morning confinement had less than 5 people. Even further, he testified that in conjunction or in accordance to the reg, the cell extraction must be recorded. And as Your Honor saw and heard in that video, Senior Airman Castle's fist makes contact with Sergeant Poteet's nose. The bodily harm was done unlawfully and with enough force to deviate his septum and require surgery. And while Sergeant Poteet testified that he didn't realize he was hit until after it all happened, he was still hit. And ultimately, it resulted in that deviated septum. The video and the testimony are both clear pieces of evidence as to why Airman Castle assaulted Sergeant Poteet. Your Honor, this case is not about a unit or a command team who was out to get their member. It's not that anyone in his unit considered him a nut job, a characterization raised by defense, but they saw him as a member who simply was trying to get out of work. So Yes, the unit could have done a better job at communicating with Airman Castle and explaining the changes in the unit structure and see if that had changed things. But in a squadron of 300 people, he was still getting direct attention, still working with the unit to make sure that there were changes in his duty station, that he was being accommodated as best as possible. And Colonel Vasquez did take the stand and explain that he reached out to mental health professionals in their expertise and asked, is there anything that we can do? Is there anything in his record? Because he's asking to telework, but I've received no paperwork. What can we do? And it was mental health staff who told him that he doesn't need to telework, that he needs to face the issues in his units and learn coping skills. And Colonel Vasquez took their recommendation because ultimately, at the end of the day, they are the mental health professionals. So he complied with what was advised of him. This case truly is about a former staff sergeant who doesn't respect his commander, doesn't respect the Air Force, who can't comply with orders when given and directed. He had a duty to comply when he was asked to do something, show up to work. He had a duty to comply when he was told, show up to work. And he had a duty to comply when he was given an order and made to show up to work. He also had a duty to comply when he was ordered to go to TAPS, or at least informed that he wasn't going to complete TAPS. He chose from December of 2022 to April of 2023 to not uphold the standards of the military, when he disrespected his NCO, when he failed to follow a lawful order, and when he was finally caught and arrested and brought to confinement when he assaulted a security forces member. The only appropriate verdict, Your Honor, is to find Airman Castle guilty of all charges and specifications, a verdict consistent with the law and supported by the facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Counsel. Defense Counsel?
Yes, please. Morning, ma'am. This case is about a young airman who